Hello, I'm Gopika Nambyar and I'm an advocate practicing at the Madras High Court. On the 24th of March 2020, the Honorable Prime Minister of India imposed a 21-day lockdown throughout the entire country. This lockdown is seen as the only way to combat the invisible but seemingly omnipresent and deadly enemy that COVID-19 is proving out to be. After the announcement by the Honorable Prime Minister, many of my friends asked me as to which law gives power to the government to impose such a lockdown. And secondly, as to whether there would be a continuous supply of essential goods during such period. Now the power to the state as well as the central government to impose not only a lockdown but any kind of measure to prevent and combat the spread of epidemics such as COVID-19 stems from two legislations. Firstly, the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 and secondly, the Disaster Management Act of 2005. You must have noticed that even prior to the Honorable Prime Minister's announcement, many of our state governments have been imposing restrictions. This power to impose restrictions comes from the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897. The Act by itself is a small piece of legislation, contains only 4 sections. But what it does is it empowers the state government to prescribe temporary regulations and take such measures as it deems fit to prevent the outbreak of an epidemic. Now, what are these measures are not specified under this Act? It very pragmatically leaves it to the discretion of the state government to impose such measures as it deems fit depending upon the situation in each state. And in fact, the word epidemic itself is not defined under the legislation. However, there is no doubt about the fact that COVID-19 is an epidemic. It has been classified as a pandemic by the World Health Organization. Therefore, this law would apply in the present situation. Now, secondly, the power which the central government gets to impose such regulations, including the lockdown, is from the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Now, the ambit of the word disaster under this piece of legislation is quite wide. It includes a catastrophe, a calamity, a mishap, or any other kind of grave occurrence. Now, spread of epidemics such as COVID-19 would naturally fall within the ambit of catastrophe as envisaged under the Act. Now, this Disaster Management Act 2005 provides for the creation of a National Disaster Management Authority. Now, the chairperson of this National Disaster Management Authority is the Prime Minister of the country. It consists of 9 other members. Now, this authority has, on the 24th of March 2020, exercised its powers under Section 6. If I have to be more specific, it is Section 6, subsection 2, clause I of the Disaster Management Act 2005 to prescribe the policy of social distancing as the means and measure to combat the spread of COVID-19. Now, what this Section 6, subsection 2, clause I says is that it is typically a generic provision that enables the authority to take all such measures as it considered necessary for the prevention, mitigation, etc. of the disaster. Now, on the same day, 24th of March 2020, this National Disaster Management Authority directs the National Executive Council to issue necessary guidelines using their power under Section 10, subsection 2, clause L of the Disaster Management Act. Now, what is this National Executive Committee? The National Executive Committee is headed by the Principal Secretary, Department of Home Affairs, who is the chairperson, and it consists of secretaries from various departments of the central government as its members. Now, what is the power vested under Section 10 to the Executive Committee? Under Section 10, subsection 2, clause L, this committee is vested with the power to lay down guidelines and give directions to the concerned ministries of the central government and the state government regarding the measures to be taken by them to combat a disaster. Now, it is using this power that guidelines were framed by the executive committee that imposed the 21-day lockdown. Now, these guidelines are in fact, these are the guidelines, and all of them are available in the website of the Ministry of Home Affairs. They are just 4-page guidelines, very simply worded. I'd advise all of you to read them because it will give us proper clarity. Now, before that, what is a lockdown is something that is not defined either in the Epidemic Diseases Act nor in the Disaster Management Act. But the dictionary meaning says that it is a state of isolation or restricted access instituted as a security measure. Now, these guidelines that have been framed by the executive committee, once you read them, it becomes very clear that our doubts and our fears about the availability of essentials is unnecessary. Now, paragraph 3 of these guidelines categorically provide that hospitals as well as medical establishments such as chemist shops, laboratories, ambulance services, etc. will remain open and available. Paragraph 4 of the guidelines, while ordering private and commercial establishments to be shut down, makes out an exception for shops dealing with foods, groceries, etc. And a very important provision in the guidelines is that it advises district authorities to facilitate as far as possible door-to-door delivery of essentials so that the principle or the policy of social distancing is achieved. Now, this I feel is an extremely important provision. To give practical effect to that provision, the state government needs to work in tandem with the district authority. Now, other essential services, some of the other essential services which are available during the lockdown period include banking services, ATMs, petroleum products, cooking gas is available, and there can be delivery of all essential goods including food, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, etc. through e-commerce. There are of course other essentials which are also going to be available. The complete list is mentioned in the guidelines. I'm only mentioning what is significant. Now, the next paragraph 14 of the guidelines deploys or puts the responsibility on executive magistrate to implement these guidelines in respective districts. These executive magistrates will be known as incident commanders, and they will issue passes for enabling essential movements. Paragraph 15 of the guidelines very clearly clarifies that these strict restrictions apply for the restricted movement of people but not of essential goods. Therefore, there will be unrestricted movement of essential goods throughout the respective states. Now, these guidelines, according to me, strike a balance between keeping up with the policy of social distancing and also ensuring that essential commodities will be available to the general public. Therefore, if there is no door-to-door delivery of essential goods, there is nothing wrong if an individual steps out to buy essential commodities. Individuals, I say, and not in groups. However, stepping out without any reason or with reasons which are extremely trivial in the light of the present situations will attract a very strict penalty. These offences and these penalties are also mentioned under the guidelines. They include section 188 of the Indian Penal Code, which talks about disobedience to an order that is passed by a public servant. Then offences under section 51 to 60 of the Disaster Management Act 2005. Let me tell you that the punishments which are prescribed for these offences range from a period of 6 months to 2 years imprisonment. Then there are of course various other provisions in the Indian Penal Code which the state government can and has been enforcing to punish people who violate the regulations. They include section 269, which talks about a negligent act likely to spread infection of a disease dangerous to life. Section 270, malignant act likely to spread infection of a disease dangerous to life. And section 271, which talks or provides punishment for disobedience to quarantine rule. Now, most of the state governments have, of course, also declared the operation of Section 144 of the Code of Criminal Procedure to avoid and to prevent public gatherings. Now, this Disaster Management Act 2005, which the government has invoked, is a piece of legislation that envisages the concerted efforts of the district authorities, the state government, and the central government, who have to work in tandem. This, I feel, is extremely important, and it is extremely imperative that these authorities work together so as to minimize the difficulties that different sections of the population, especially people from the economically weaker sections of the society, are going to face as a result of the lockdown. As far as our responsibility as citizens of the country is concerned, I'm reminded of a quote by the Norwegian playwright Mr. Henrik Ibsen, who said that the community is like a ship. It is the responsibility of each one of us to be at the helm. I must say that today the situation is such that each one of us are at the helm. And if we are to steer the ship of life and the ship of existence to safer waters, we have to follow this policy of social distancing, and we have to diligently adhere to the guidelines that the government has framed. By doing so, we do the greatest service of not only saving our lives, but saving the lives of our fellow countrymen. Thank you.